I really, really believe that each kid is an individual.
Mm-hmm.
There are some kids that are wired so weird, and when I say weird, I mean weird as in early. Like Jet Lawrence was good to go. Haiden Deegan was good to go. Some kids' brains can just handle it. I mean, you could throw them in a pack of wolves and they come out a wolf. I think, unfortunately, you got to play this little game with what you're offered, what you're given. But I would always side on doing a little bit extra and taking a little bit more time, because you're going to be in the pros for a long time. If it goes right, that's what you want. And there's no rush to get in there right away. Because think about it. If you have a 12-year run of making money, I would rather be making money from 30 to 32 than 16 to 18. There's more money in the end.
Welcome back to another episode of Navigating Amateur Motocross. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at Dunlop Tires. I'm extremely happy to introduce this show. We've once again got our co-host, Derrek Harris. How you doing, my man?
Good. Great to see you, Coach.
Yeah, thank you so much for carving time out. And we have the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Mr. Daniel Blair. Mr. Blair, how are you, sir?
Doing good. Just processing a race weekend with my boy and getting ready for another one this weekend. So those are always fun as you try to figure things out. I feel like these kids are carburetors that are never jetted right, and you're just constantly trying to figure out which pilot and main to put in them. And sometimes you got to work on your own carburetor. So today is more of a self-carburation day than him. He actually raced. He rode really well this weekend. I just I did a lot of goofing. So we got to lean out the needle a little bit over here with Dad.
I always think this is interesting, Derek, because what a lot of people don't realize with Daniel, very successful Arenacross champion, West Coast, rode for Geico Honda, a lot of experience under the hood. And now he's the founder of a very, very cool mentorship program, Supercross U. It's interesting to listen to the founder have to actually take a spoonful of his own medicine. And Derek, you've seen this quite a bit.
Unfortunately, my entire career has been in the amateur side of things. And so I've gotten to make great relationships with families, but obviously see the kids, the relationship between the parents, the different methodologies, everybody's unique. So it's not like every kid's the same way and every dad's the same way. But yeah, I've gotten to see it all. And then a little bit off camera, you were saying, man, it's my own kid. On that aside, when you talk to Tony Alessi and a little bit in the behind the scenes there, it's like how he can treat his pros on his team and get amazing results, I think, out of him. I think we've joked about him being the pro whisperer. But on the flip side, if it's Mike, it's a whole different story. And I think still is to this day. So just because it's his son, something changes there a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, this is one of the things I love. Do you mind giving a little bit elevator pitch on this Supercross U? I love the idea. I'd want to give you an opportunity to talk about what is it that you're doing, because I've never seen anything like it in our sport.
So pretty much what I consider to be is like a roadmap for kids that want to make it to Supercross. I think every amateur racer has this dream, right? They want to be on a gate in Supercross. Some it's Eli Tomac or bust. That's what they think. That's what the family thinks. And some it's like, I just want to get in that stadium once and make a main, or just get in the night show. Everyone has their own level and their own dream. And I've experienced this sport from so many different angles that I wanted to create pretty much like a guidance program that helps families navigate their way from 50s all the way to the gate of that Futures race. Now that the Futures exists, I feel like that's one of the best moves the sport's made, is to create this bridge in between amateur and pro that didn't exist before. And once you're on the gate in Futures, then, okay, you enter a whole new world. And that's, I think there's people out there that can maybe even help these kids better than I can, because I take more of a macro approach to that part of racing. But when it comes to amateurs, I'm very good at guiding and getting the kids there and making sure they check every box needed before they get there. And so Supercross University is pretty much founded to do that. We have a basic curriculum, which is a video series that allows families to just learn things that they don't know. I mean, I was blown away as the Orange Brigade team manager of how many these families, man, they're so good. These kids were so good, but a lot of things they didn't know that I thought was kind of basic, like just some basic navigation. And so I created the curriculum for that to help families just kind of keep them on the path, the right direction. And then I offer like career guidance and one-on-one consultations with families that want more than that, where I can actually help them strategize and plan their calendars and, know when to go in on something, know when to go out on something, and know when to go left and when to go right. And I feel like this sport has a lot of different roads to get to where you want to be, and everyone's road's going to be a little bit different. And I've experienced so many different pathways that I feel like I can take a kid and understand them, understand their family, and go, okay, I think this is the path for you. This is the roadmap for you. And that might be a kid that's ready to go in 15 years old, get in there and race Supercross. You're ready. And there might be a 17-year-old kid where I say, you're not ready this year. You need to wait 1 year. And that's all dependent on them. And starts as young as 50s. I got 50 kids right now in my program that they want to make Lorettas. They've never made it before. So I'm helping them strategize their pathway to make it to Lorettas, because that's first on their list, at least in their goals. So again, overall, it's a guidance program. It's education, little bit of coaching, but mostly leading people to coaching and strategizing how to find coaching. So I'd say a lot of macro and a little bit of micro when it comes to the details on navigating amateur racing.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's exclusively with you, right?
Just me. Yep.
When they talk, they're talking directly to yourself.
Oh, we do Zooms. So what we do in the consultations, it's one-on-one Zooms. And then I actually record those Zooms. And then within 5 minutes after, I email them the file, because I don't like families trying to take notes down while we're talking. You have to engage. We have to talk back and forth. That's how we get places. And if they're writing notes down, they're not really listening.
Yeah.
So I tell people, no pen, no paper. Let's just engage. Let's get as much in as we can. And then they can watch the file back later. And a lot of the lessons are actually bigger lessons that you can revisit over time and repeat, because a lot of things you learn, and then you do things right for 3 months, and then you slip and you need to come back. So, yeah, they're all one-on-one consultations, all Zoomed, all recorded, all delivered, and they're all built kind of with the idea of setting up dominoes so you could just kind of your way to your goals. And it's been amazing. It's been fun. It's all out of control, though. I'll tell you right now, I got 250 A rider, and then I got a 50 rider like right after. And it's like, man, oh my God, I got one kid we're planning on Futures. The next kid we're trying to make it to his first regional. And it's like, oh my God. But I have a range and experience from working with Orange Brigade kids, ranging from little 50 shredders to kids that were winning Supercross Futures. So I have the ability to do it. I just got to be able to be nimble enough in the moment to bounce around, because it bounces around, man. Every kid's different and every story is a little different.
Well, Derek, I really appreciate that Daniel's done this, because when you and I launched this podcast, obviously I reached out to Daniel, invited him on, and he said, hey, bud, I'll get back to you when I can. Had a lot of career changes that were going on. I'm at 100% transparency. Daniel didn't even tell me he was starting Supercross U. Derek and I, we're knocking these things out once a month. And then Daniel went public with his SXU, and, here we are. And Daniel, we want to personally thank you for coming on board, because every month that we do this show, this is what Derek's been saying for ever since he and I met, is it's like there's 155 spokes out there, and there's no hub that everybody's centered off of. And it's interesting that you brought up Loretta's. I think it's fair to say that that's kind of the epicenter that everybody at an amateur level is striving to get off the ground initially. Once again, just to validate that this show is not scripted, Derek and I have talked about this numerous times, because Derek in his shop literally could have a motor for a 50, and right next to it, he's got Caden Braswell's motor, that he's working on. So Derek, what's your, when you and I have spoken about this off the record numerous times. Obviously, we've got Daniel with us here. And again, Daniel, thank you for your time. Derek, what's your thoughts in regards to how do we even begin to lay the foundation to start to set these kids up? And obviously, we've got Daniel to kind of chime in on this.
Well, actually, I'm glad that Daniel's on the show, because I had a lot of questions for him, being on a couple sides of the fence now. I've been on at the amateur races year over year over year. And I've had a little bit of involvement on the pro side, but that's not our primary focus as a business. So I feel like I have a good finger on amateurs. However, I think the show and what Daniel's trying to do here is really brilliant, but that bridge to pro is very tough. We haven't had a good route for a lot of kids to make that bridge. So actually I had a lot of questions for Daniel, if he's okay with it. And I don't want you to get in trouble if it's something you don't want to talk about, or that's not the purpose here. It's not to throw shade at any of the promotion groups or anything like that. But one of the things that me and Coach talk about on here is I'm not convinced that the road to Loretta's is the actual road to pro anymore. And I also am not convinced that the current status of amateur racing is producing what I would call good U.S. pros. And I would even say international pros. So I kind of want, you just got done with spring nationals a couple of weeks ago. What's your take on the current status of amateur racing? And I have some ideas that I would propose if I were the king for a day, but I would love to hear your opinion because you've had your finger on pro, on amateur, the brigade side, everything.
Well, I'll start with Cole Davies. He never raced an amateur race before he signed his deal with Star Yamaha. He never did because the sport has changed. Now, the sport in years past had a fairly direct pathway into the factory pits, which was you had to be good at the amateur nationals in America. You had to win Loretta's was definitely the biggest part of that. And that was the pathway in. But they, to their credit, created the futures and the combines, which gave us a chance to see these amateur kids in a real setting under the lights and on the national tracks with all the factory teams watching. And since that's happened, the sport has changed. Before this year, there were 7 riders who have won a Supercross Futures. That would be Chance Hymas, Ryder DeFrancesco, Daxton Bennick, Julian Beaumer, Casey Cochran, Drew Adams, and Cole Davies. All 7 of them got factory rides, and nobody else has but those 7. And they all won Supercross Futures races, and they came from different backgrounds, Cole Davies being the most recent, and he didn't do any amateur nationals, not one. So I agree that there is no singular path through our amateur racing program or network of races that is the singular way in anymore. In fact, to be honest with you, the way in is through the futures and the combines. If you win those, your odds are better because the factory teams actually watch those. You're racing in a real setting, and you can see if these kids really have it on the big stage on the tracks that they're going to have to do it on in the pros. And it's, to me, it's been one of the biggest fixes our sport has ever had. That leads me to amateur racing now. And to me, the amateur side of racing now becomes more of a tool, more of a playground, more of a sculpting program, you would say, to get you ready for futures and combine. So Loretta Lynn's is still, to me, I mean, it's the premier one because you get all the competitors, all the best kids in the country all together on a fairly fair track because, you know, they ride it during the year. It's, I mean, once you kind of have it mastered, I think you kind of have it mastered. That's good Loretta kids are good Loretta kids for sure. And I like the test that you're put under there because it's just the pressure, the environment. But I do think that they're all very equal in value now because they're all equally getting kids ready for the ultimate test, which is futures and combines. So I think amateur racing can be used in this country different ways. I mean, I can tell you right now, I mean, I hate to reveal the plan, but I'll tell you the plan. My son's racing Loretta's this year for the very first time. He's never raced any big race in his life, and he wants to go. He told me, I want to go, Dad. And I said, okay. Little does he know that next year, instead of jumping right into it another year, back-to-back years, and going after it again, don't tell him this yet, but we're actually going GNCC racing for a year because he needs some more experience in a different type of setting that's going to have him ready for outdoors because he's not a very good outdoor rider yet. And instead of going to all the amateur nationals and jumping right in, I feel like he needs a year of some diversity and some range. And so we plan on doing Loretta's this year and then going right into Supercross training in the fall and getting him one step closer to that goal. Going to race Arenacross all winter because I think Arenacross is incredible. I think it's one of the best things in the sport. When you can learn to fight in that cage, you can fight in the bigger cage. And then we'll pivot right over to the GNCCs where he's going to race a year of that and learn a new trait before we dive into 2027, which I don't know what that's going to be like yet. Maybe we go back into amateur. Maybe he's ready to go right into futures and combines. I don't know. But that's my overall thought. I look at them as tools now. They're preparation places to get you ready for the ultimate goal, which is to be on the gate for a futures and a combine where you have a chance to impress Roger DeCoster and Mitch Payton and Bobby Reagan. And if you do it there, you get your shot in the pros and you're more likely ready to do good in the pros anyway. So that'd be my macro answer to the question.
Derek, when you look at that from a 10,000 foot view, what would be your input? What would you do differently?
Well, firstly, I love what he said about using each of those as a tool for development. So this is the correct approach, I think. Obviously, you're smart, so you're doing the correct approach. But from my perspective, if I were to wave a magic wand, I personally think amateur racing is in disarray in the sense that what does a spring national championship really get you nowadays? And I think the answer to that is very little. And I think the same thing applies to Loretta's. It's not an absolute guarantee to the pathway to Supercross. And realistically, that's our sport. So I like the idea of what you're saying here is to make him a well-rounded rider. Let's throw him in all conditions. And I think you have these races and these series at your disposal to do so. And I agree with you. I think that's phenomenal. I would love to see, so like with Arenacross, that should become more a bigger part of the amateur schedule for a lot of athletes and families. They should throw that into their schedule. And then the other side, like now it's becoming, because of Futures, I agree with you, best thing that's ever happened to the amateur side of the sport. We needed this a long time ago, but I would expand upon that concept. I think we need to have localized series throughout the country that build towards like a state or regional type series of Futures type Supercross. And maybe we dumb down the tracks a little bit for that. So we build a spec type obstacle that can be rearranged, spec obstacles that can be rearranged any way the track builders want, but we get a like unified concept there where you can have racing kind of like what Oak Hill is trying to do at their spring national. I think we need that throughout the country at every single racetrack, because that's where you're trying to head. I mean, you can become a great outdoor racer and it means nothing if you can't, like, look at, no offense, I love them, Ty Masterpool, but they probably would have, in hindsight, put more time in on Supercross younger than what they did if they knew that they were going to make it. So that's an area I would do. And then lastly, I love your idea of the combines. I think they need to make the combines much better, and whatever they're called now or whatever. I think we should have a true unified amateur national championship, which is diverse, not just Loretta's. So it's summertime, kids are off. You should have like a 3-4 round series. It'd be East, Central, West. It's 4 rounds. You get the best amateurs in the country to go to all 4. And then the top from those 4 can go to the final national combine championship. Now I think it's 11 outdoor rounds. So that doesn't exactly work out. But when it was 12 rounds, and you get to get the kids on the same racetrack, and I think you expand that to make it a financial incentive for the track. So the track can have like an 85 class, a super mini class, a 125 class, and then the 250 combine class. And I think you would have an opportunity for these top kids in the country to go race a 4-race series at diverse tracks. It's summertime, they're off. These parents are already making it to Futures and to all these other rounds. So I think they're going to be able to make it. I hate to say that, if you don't have the money, sorry, but that's the nature of the sport. It is what it is nowadays, right? All these families are chasing it. And I think that would, which I don't understand why it doesn't happen today. It blows my mind. It's the same promotion group as Loretta's. So you guys have these tracks and you have this ability and you have the national infrastructure there and all the staff and all of the flaggers and the tracks prepped and everything's there. You're already running a combine at a couple of them. Why not expand that day into a little bit bigger day and have multiple, for every level of racing? And then make it a 4-round series, regionally, so to speak. So that would be my overarching idea on the outdoor side. And then I think somehow we need to bring Futures type racing, but at a lower level, like an easier track level, a safer track level, but starting kids off on 65s, 85s, 125s regionally throughout the country, somehow kind of the Oak Hill Spring National Supercross model.
If you guys don't mind, I want to elaborate on your thread of thought, and I would like the perspective from both of you guys. We're at a point in our industry where homeschool is the norm now. It's no longer the exception, it's the norm. And yet we still hear that, and I'm going to use Cooper Webb, right? What does everybody say? When we go west, we don't see the best of Cooper. We go east, we start to see Cooper really shape up. And Daniel, I've always been amazed with the mobility that the parents have, homeschooled in motorhomes, going to different facilities. I live in Orlando. If I thought my son was going to go pro, I'd be calling some friends in Texas and I'd start heading further west till I get into that West Coast dirt, not become a wonder, which, yourself, I call it the agents, talking to the agents. They don't want wonders. They don't want facility kids that only know how to go fast on one type of track. But yet it still seems to be the plague of, oh, well, he's a West Coast rider. So when we go east, we don't expect as much. Then isn't it interesting? Take somebody that's trying to think like an RJ or somebody. His situation is a little bit different this year because of his injury. But, how many people, and you guys can help me out on this, who got an East Coast championship and then decided to race West Coast knowing that they were going to go pro, and it gave them an opportunity to get exposed to both types of dirt before they go 450. But then we don't see it at the amateur level. So to me, if you incorporate the Arenacross, East Coast, West Coast, even, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, when they're bringing in dirt, right? You're bringing in East Coast dirt into an Arenacross. You go west, you're bringing in West Coast dirt. Take everything that you guys have already put out there. You've got Arenacrosses, which I loved when it was the road to Supercross. That made all the sense in the world. Then the idea that you've got different dirt types, which we always hear tends to be one of the limiting factors. And then the idea of getting in, I like you calling it the cage, Daniel. That made so much sense, right? If you can win in that cage, you can win anywhere. Then you've got the combine, you've got the Futures. Now it seems like you've got the perfect mixture from A to Z. What are your thoughts on that in regards to different dirt types and not becoming a one dirt wonder?
I mean, you're 100% right. And I think that for some, they are limited based on their location. Some have the ability to be mobile, especially more and more now. Like you said, there's families that are really moving around and making sure they're covering ground. And, you know, I think it comes down to your own personal strategy. I know some that they just want to ride one place and train at one place because they're trying to make a certain gain, and that place will provide that for them. I know some that don't like to be at one place. I know that's how I am. I take my son anywhere that I can possibly take him because it's different, and I think different is better. You know, one of my lessons on Supercross U is the word adaptable and how to push the adaptable trait. I think in this sport, you have to be adaptable. Cole Davies was a prime example of that. He was really good at Anaheim, that first one. It was, for a West Coast race, it was very east that day. It was very sticky and ruddy. And then Salt Lake was absolute concrete, and he's a very adaptable kid, and that's why he was able to succeed on both terrains, which if you're a scout for a pro team, you want that. You don't want to have half the year where you're just like, well, we're stuck in that half the year. But it really just comes down to each individual family strategizing that and chasing the weakness. And I can tell you right now, my son grew up on the West Coast. It's a West Coast kid. I don't know why this is, but he is better on East Coast soil. When it's ruddy and jacked up, he loves it. And it makes no sense because I hated that. He actually struggles when it's hard packed for some reason. And he also is a very mid-range throttle rider, which makes no sense because he would be better on West Coast style stuff. So I'm navigating that right now myself and trying to figure that out. But you're right. If you want to be good in one type of terrain, then you're going to be great in those situations. And maybe you're going to be winning that race, and maybe you're going to get some whatever. But if you want to be a champion at the highest level, you have to be good everywhere. Jet and Chase and Eli, they are good on every single thing you can imagine. Even Cooper Webb, he might not be special on hard pack West Coast stuff compared to him on the East, but he's figured it out. He's gotten better at it because he had to. But that was a point of emphasis in his focus. So I agree with you. It really just comes down to really looking at it and trying to figure out, like, we're great on this and we're bad on this. And that's why for me, my son, as much as he hates these hard pack dry things I'm taking him to lately, it's because I weirdly sense a weakness and I don't get it because he grew up on it. But he also was a little goofy kid at that time. He didn't take anything serious. So I'm starting fresh with a 14-year-old who is really a blank slate. So you just have to go and target your weaknesses. I talk a lot about how you don't take a shotgun approach to anything. You take a sniper approach to everything, and you need to single out the problems and fix them. And if your problem is a certain type of soil or a certain condition, then you have to zap it, and you have to go and find it and put a laser on it and fix it, and then immediately move on to the next problem. And eventually your weakest trait will be strong. So individual strategy, I think, would be the answer to the question. And but something that people do need to take more serious, because once you get to the pro level, you have to be good everywhere. And if you're not, the teams know it, and it's hard to invest in someone when you know half the year you're just going to be okay.
This is go right ahead, Derek. Go right ahead.
Okay. So with the futures coming to be and how that's going specifically with your business, we've asked this question on the show before, but at what age should people start riding supercrossy type stuff, in your opinion? How much time should they focus on it throughout the year? I'm sure this is a part of your kind of secret sauce. You don't have to share everything if you don't want. But I'm of the belief that now it's the new thing. You're going to have to be on that a good portion. And an example I give is going back with Caden Braswell. He hadn't rode any of it. Goes and wins a B title, schoolboy title. He won some 85 titles, et cetera, et cetera. But the first time he rode was going to be his A year because of the Futures the Futures events. And that's the first time he'd really rode a Supercross track. And so if you were to go back, like with Tony Alessi and what he had said, that was his biggest flaw with Mike, is like, hey, we should have been on a Supercross track way earlier. So for you, when does that start and what does that look like?
65s. As soon as you're on a 65, because there's a transmission, there's gears, there's shifting. I think 50s are just souped up pit bikes. And I don't mean that to be a diss. I think they're incredible. It's the foundation bike that teaches you all the form and understanding suspension, but in reality, they don't have clutches. They don't have gearboxes. So to me, it's more of a super play bike that you use specifically for building physical foundation. But as soon as you have a clutch and a transmission, I think you should be on Supercross immediately. Now, that doesn't mean you're on a Supercross track with the pros and you're out getting hurt. That means you have a track that emulates Supercross, that has some little tiny jump on, jump off. It could be so small that you could do it on a junior Cobra, but on a 65, you should be doing jump ons and jump offs and little doubles and little tabletops and learning all those traits from the very beginning. Now, as far as how much you should be doing it, it really depends on the person. But I mean, going back to my son, I'll go back to him because he's an easy reference point for me. But He never raced serious until now. This is the first year at 14 he's ever even considered racing serious. But he grew up on a Supercross track starting on a 50. And it's because I had a buddy that lived 10 minutes down the road, and I had not enough time in the day to take him to the track all the time. And I built a tiny little Supercross track that had whoops and doubles and tabletops and jump-ons and jump-offs. And I had a KLX 110, and he had a little 50. And we rode around hundreds of, I'd say 80% of his life was on that little track. And I mean, we're talking, I was stuffing him and brake checking him. And I mean, teaching him all that stuff on a 50. And now we fast forward and he's 14 years old. Again, he's never raced anything serious. He's a C rider, and he can get on a 250 right now and do an entire Supercross track and triple around everything. And it's because he did all that stuff very, very early. So I think you need to be on it right away. And I think one of the points you were making about amateur racing is that there's a lot of pressure and a lot of intensity towards the results of it. But in reality, if you could take some of that and apply it towards just Supercross foundation work in the beginning, it eases the load on the motorcycles. It eases the load on your time, and you lay the groundwork for what's going to matter in the future. So yeah, 8 years old on a 65, if you could get a track 10 minutes down the road from your house and build the silliest little single trail width of one motorcycle Supercross track, you should be on that thing 100 hours a year, like minimum. I mean,
Can I
force it.
expand on that a little bit? I agree entirely. I've said this a multitude of times when we had the 65s in the SMX TV show and the kid got in trouble for jumping the double. I was on maybe the negative side of that argument, saying the kid shouldn't have jumped it. They made the rule. Don't do it. I get that it was awesome. It's impressive. But my thing is, you don't put 5-year-olds or 8-year-olds or 7-year-olds on a pro football field and say, play the whole field. You condense the field and you say, hey, this is the size field you play on for how big and fast and strong you guys are as athletes. And I think the same applies to dirt bikes. They should scale their way up. So if you're on a 50 or a 60 or an 80, the track should be the same type of timing and obstacle concepts, but they don't have the same suspension as a big bike, and they don't have the same wheel size as a big bike, and the kid's not the same level as a big bike, but the concepts are the same. So if you can double and step on and step off and get your rhythms and timing on a track that allows you the quote unquote margin of safety of, hey, I cased it, I didn't just die like I would on a big bike track. To me, I agree. And I think my question, I guess, is, I think the electric bike future, and potentially as that transitions down to smaller and smaller bikes and more accessible bikes, can potentially dramatically change Supercross off-season training, because young kids can just go play around on one of these electric bikes as well. I know it doesn't have the transmission and the clutch and all that, but I think the timing aspect, kind of like the McGrath BMX era, maybe will transition. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree, and I'll give you an example that's not exactly what you're saying, but it's a pretty close. Is Max Folan grew up with like an electric trials bike in his backyard. Now, he wasn't doing Supercross in his backyard, but he was doing a lot of trials stuff in the rainy winter when he couldn't do anything else, and he was just playing around a lot, and that's why that kid's got phenomenal bike skill. If you were to take that one step further, I think it's what you're talking about, which is having a little playful Supercross track. I mean, it's going to be a lot easier to create these little things. And yes, you could be on an E50 for sure, or the E5, whatever, even the little E2, and be out on that stuff, learning those foundational skills. Now, to actually do the Supercross side and have like a Supercross type program, I like the 65 because it's the first real motorcycle. But yeah, I think a kid on a Stasic right now, if you have a Stasic, that kid should be hopping around, bouncing around, wheeling over things, hitting little whoops, a 1,000,000%, and it will offer more opportunity for that. And that doesn't mean necessarily that's going to just bridge right into an E career. We don't know where the sport's going with E yet all the way, but it's hard to get on a Cobra 50, that loud little rocket ship, and in your neighborhood and go playing around on a little Supercross track that you can make in your backyard with shovels. But on a Stasic or a Strider, even like just walking around, I mean, absolutely they should be doing that. And I think you're right. The sooner the better that you learn those traits and learn how to be in the tight confines of something, the better you'll be in the end. Because again, like I said, my son is like a C outdoor rider and like fast B Supercross rider, and we haven't even really put any time in. It's just the natural traits that he carried over from being a little kid on it from as soon as he could leave the ground. So you're 100% right. I mean, the sooner the better. As soon as you can do anything Supercross in feeling, you should be doing it immediately.
I look at it like the 10,000 hours analogy. We've used that on our podcast before here, which is all these kids have 10,000 hours in motocross, quote unquote. You know, they have a lot of background in that. They know how to case that type of obstacle. They know how to hit the bumps. They know how to save when they get sideways, you know, that type of stuff. But Supercross for a lot of these kids, now it's better with the Futures. It's fantastic. But previously, the first time they prior to Futures maybe ever trained for Supercross for a lot of these pros was, okay, I'm a pro. All right, it's the off season into my rookie year, and I'm going to go ride Supercross. Well, they come into the season with at most 50 to 70 hours of track time. If they're really lucky, they can put that in an off season. That's just not enough hours to figure out how to save a bike through whoops or how to save a little tiny case between rhythms and what the elite guys can do there. So I think I look at it like the more time you get early on doing that type of stuff is just going to translate. I mean, look at the Futures this weekend. It seemed like anybody who got out front threw it away. And it's just, that was a really tricky track for relatively new athletes to that segment of racing.
Daniel, let me ask you this. You've mentioned it twice now that, Evan is 14. If you could have, like we do in the social media, you kind of beta test two different, test A, test B. Would you rather work with an athlete that started riding at 7 and start working with him at 14? Or would you rather have what you did with Evan, where he was playing, laid the foundation, and now he's deciding to get serious at 14? Derek, this kind of reminds me of Hudson Short, right? It's like all of a sudden he's decided with no pressure. He's just decided, yeah, I think I want to do this. My dad's a stud on a dirt bike. Which would you rather have, just based on your experience? Because obviously every child's completely different.
I don't know yet. I'm going to find that out, to be honest with you. And that's where I'm in a weird spot with my son, because I wouldn't even say my intrigue in him possibly having a shot at doing this comes from his Supercross unique little background that we had. It actually comes from just his mentality post-puberty. Honestly, I don't really think this thing starts or should start really until you go through puberty, because once you go through puberty, you come out a different person. Some kids are unbelievably just little hardworking little warriors, and then they go through puberty and they're like, yeah, I did that, and now I just want to hang out and look for chicks. And then you have a kid like my son who literally could not take one thing serious at all until he went through puberty, was scared to death of everything until he went through puberty, and now he's a different person. So my intrigue with him is the fact that he is kind of psychotically motivated and the hardest working kid I've ever seen, and is just very driven and has a weirdly mature mind for a little 14-year-old. I just got lucky that we did that. And again, it wasn't part of a master plan or design. I mean, he quit a year and a half ago, and I sold every bike because he wouldn't jump a little double at a track that a little girl, Yamina Bering, was doing on her 65. She was like 8 or 9, and he wouldn't do it. And after the day, he said he didn't want to do this anymore. He was scared to death, and he was done. This is when he was maybe 13, or I think we're coming up. This is 13. This is a year and a half ago, and he didn't want to do it anymore because he said it made him feel bad. He didn't want to do it, and he didn't like how hot it was. I mean, this is a year and a half ago, and he quit. And then now all of a sudden he goes through puberty, and it's like all things just change. The next thing you know, he's like, Dad, I want to do this. And I'm like, no. And he goes, no, I really do. And I'll just tell you a little backstory. What I did with him, I got him a bike, and I said, it's bone stock 85, not even changing your Maxxis tires. It came with Maxxis tires. I said, I'm not doing anything until you put 50 hours in of actual real motivated work. And you can ride this thing 1,000 hours for all I care for fun, but you're not racing. I'm not going to even remotely take this serious unless you could do 50 hours straight. And I don't know, to be honest with you, between you and I, that was kind of a very big hurdle for him to climb. And I did that by design because I didn't want to go racing. I didn't want to do this at all because the only signs I had seen from him was that he was a goofy little kid with a lot of fear. And I didn't want him to go through this. I didn't want to put our family through this. I wanted to just have fun with my son and go riding, and we could play. And then he took offense to it. And this is right around puberty time. He went through it, and then he put 50 hours down. And now we're probably at 300 hours of just insane motivated riding. And it's like, oops, I kind of didn't mean to do that. And now here we are. We're racing every weekend, and he's mad at me because I can't keep up with his efforts. I mean, really, it's a problem in our house. He wants more, and I can't give him more at the moment. I just chill, buddy. So I would say I can't answer your question because I don't know yet if this is going to turn out okay for him, or if we missed the window. Did I miss too much in the younger years of development and going through all the troubles? Because right now we're battling the fact that he's got a checklist of stupid things he has to go through. He's going to make a lot of mistakes and do a lot of dumb things, and he's so mad about it. And I'm like, no, every other kid went through this already, and you haven't yet. But you're 14. You can handle this better than maybe a kid could because you could process it better than they could. So maybe this works. Maybe he ends up being great at this and gets in there and he becomes a great Supercross racer, and who knows? Or maybe he does just good enough to come up short. And I look back and go, man, we just didn't race enough when he was young. I can't answer that, but I really don't regret anything because I don't think anything would have worked prior to puberty with him. He just wasn't his type. The only way it would have worked is if I would have forced him, and I wasn't going to do that no matter what. So there was no way it would have worked for him the other way anyways. So this is going to either work or not, but this is the only way that it would work for us because I wasn't going to do what was required to force him to be something special young when he didn't have it. He did not have those traits at all. And so ask me this question again in 3 or 4 years and I'll let you know. I have no clue.
Derek, can I rip the scab off?
Go for it.
So Daniel, one of the things that Derek and I have talked a lot about, and it falls right in line with what you're saying, hindsight's always 20/20, right? And you look at Jet Reynolds, Kawasaki, his entire career goes pro, hasn't produced the results. I was working with a rider at the time, let's call it super mini class. And the top 4 guys in that class were Daxton Bennett, Haiden Deegan, Casey Cochran, and then my rider, and then a couple others. But that year it was those top 4 guys. Obviously we fast forward, Dax is out there. Casey, let's say he's out there for all intents and purposes. We know he's currently sidelined with an injury, right? And obviously Deegan's doing quite well. Using the concept of hindsight, and you look at the fact that all 4 of those guys have started at a very young age, and yet you've got just a mixture. Now we know injuries can always become a sideline for anything. If you were taking each one of those separately, how much of that would you duplicate? How much would you completely avoid? What would be your take on looking at the last 3 years, maybe? Because it hasn't been that long where Dax, Hayden, Casey were all in the futures, like you said. Was it last year that Casey won his first one? It was, wasn't it? Because you were with him. He won a futures race.
3.
And then he signed, and then he got hurt, unfortunately. And then that leads us to where we're at right now.
Actually, all 3 of them were in 2023. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And not with the best of results. It's not like Casey came out and won 4 of the 5. And it wasn't like Hayden came out and won 2 of the 4. It wasn't like Daxton came out and won 5 out of 5. And then you've got, Jet Reynolds. I don't even think there was futures for him, right? He just went right directly to Mitch's team. Looking in hindsight, what would you do differently? What would you emulate?
I look at this more. I'll go even more, like say 20,000 feet out. I really, really believe that each kid is an individual. Mm-hmm. There are some kids that are wired so weird, and when I say weird, I mean weird as in early. Like Jet Lawrence was good to go. Haiden Deegan was good to go. Some kids' brains can just handle it. I mean, you could throw them in a pack of wolves and they come out a wolf. That's just how some are. Some can't do that. And Justin Cooper is the prime example. And I actually use this comparison a lot because Adam Cincerello is a good friend of mine, and he'll be the first to tell you, like, this, that, and this all went the wrong way. And it's because he was so damn good, they didn't know what to do with him other than to throw him in there. And guess what? I think he had the mind of a wolf, but he didn't have the body of one yet.
Exactly.
And it was unfortunate for him because if he waits another year, maybe give him 10, 15 pounds, this whole thing probably goes different for him. But it was a weird gamble that they took because he was so freaking good. And it's like, they didn't know what else to do. And again, there was no futures program to save him, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I compare that to a Justin Cooper. Justin Cooper's won the Motocross of Nations. He's a 250 Supercross champion. He's a factory 450 rider. He's got second at Indy a couple rounds ago. And he didn't turn pro till he was 19 years old. Why? Not because of some grand design. It's because he wasn't ready. He wasn't good enough yet. He wasn't big enough, smart enough, mature enough, whatever. I don't know. The bottom line, there is no right or wrong way exactly to do it. Each kid is their own individual, and they have to do their own individual pathway. And so the only thing I could say in hindsight to what you're saying is each one of those kids had to follow their own path and do it specifically. Like for Haiden Deegan, he went to one futures race, got 5th, turned pro, and then went and got on, what did he get in the, or he got 4th at the first pro race? He did better at his first pro race than he did at futures the next weekend because he's just throw him into the wolves, and now he's a wolf beyond belief. Daxton Bennett needed that entire year of futures. I think he actually could have done maybe another half a year of futures, even maybe got a little bit more time. And Casey Cochran, honestly, he just won his way into the pros because it just worked. I mean, he won futures, he won the combine, he won the they didn't know what to do other than go. He could have used one more year also. So I think, unfortunately, you got to play this little game with what you're offered, what you're given. But I would always side on doing a little bit extra and taking a little bit more time, because you're going to be in the pros for a long time. If it goes right, that's what you want. And there's no rush to get in there right away. Because think about it. If you have a 12-year run of making money, I would rather be making money from 30 to 32 than 16 to 18. There's more money in the end. So to me, I look, again, everyone's individual, but I would always side on whatever you think it is, maybe go a little longer, because it only makes you stronger, more mature physically and mentally, emotionally, and everything. So I would just take whatever you're going to do and add a year. That's how I would look at everybody, to be honest.
In your consulting side, and this is the side that I see and have been somewhat involved with, which is the challenge, is when does an opportunity open for you to go pro? So when is a deal available, or a bike or a ride? And I think sometimes these athletes view it as this window is now, like the team wants you now. There's a ride that opens up now. Now, you ran the amateur side there. You were trying to maybe change some of that. Like, hey, he's not quite ready, but we want to keep him on the program type of a deal. But, if you don't have a lot of options, or maybe Star comes a call in your B year, and then you're like, okay, we'll sign a deal for our pro. And then that's supposed to be the next, like Daxton, his instance essentially is like, hey, you're going pro now. How do you as a rider push back on that? What would be your advice to say, hey, we think we need a little more time?
I would lean towards believing that almost 100% of the time, it's the family that wants to go in before the team. That's my experience. I think the teams would back off if the families backed off. I think the families want it more. Because they want the ride, they want the deal. Some of them, it's for financial reasons. They can't afford this anymore. They're just done. And if we can get him offloaded of our books and put him on someone else's books, then we made it. But I think most of the time it's the family and the kid. The kid wants it too. Kids, I mean, man, I wanted my pro card so bad because I wanted to have a pro card, man. I would do anything to have a pro card early, but that was me. And that was, that was some ambition of mine. It wasn't like the AMA was begging me to come in at 16. I wanted that pro card, and my dad wanted me to turn pro too. And that's why I turned pro at 16, and should have never. So I think the teams sometimes look, if you're a freak talent and your timeline is, okay, we got you in B, and then you're going to A and you're going in, they just roll it on in. But I would say that the majority of the time that I've seen, it's been a heavier push by the rider and the family to get in there as soon as possible. And the teams, I mean, at least my experience on the KTM side, working with Nate Ramsey, I'll be honest with you, Nate Ramsey is way more careful. He would love to push things back. The problem is that there's a push to go in, and when the rider performs their way in, their hands are kind of tied a little bit. It's like, they freaking want what are we supposed to do? And they roll. But he's actually been very careful and wanting to be more careful. To be honest, I feel like things would have gone, again, a little bit better for Cochran if we would have had a little bit more time. But the problem was he won his way in, and it was based on his resume and based on what was available race-wise, it just fit to go in. But
do you think that could improve if we had a better, I'm going to call it the minor leagues, but we had more races that were
Futures and Combines is helping.
What about financially? Like back in the day, in your day, the 4-stroke nationals were kind of a thing. You could go get your feet wet in some money races. And now we don't have any minor leagues, maybe Arenacross, but it's not unified like it was. So yes, I feel like we need these guys to have a quote unquote minor league or a B league. Kind of Forkner, he was in our area a lot when he made his transition, and he chased an entire year of money races as a pro before he went pro.
So did Cooper Webb.
Yeah, right. So that, to me, we just don't have that anymore. And I don't know what's changed there. Maybe the money's not there, whatever. But to me, we need something like that. And I think Futures could be it. But maybe we need to also throw in an incentive for financials on the Futures and financials for the combines. What was your thought about having a more amateur races, more combine type thing?
Well, the Futures and Combines, as I sit now, are AB, which I don't know if it stays that way. I would hope that it turns into an A class only, because if it goes A, then you can start paying. Not saying that they will, or that's in the plans. I have actually, in my current state, have zero clue what's going on over there anymore. So I don't know what's happening. But I would like to see Futures and Combines become A only. I wish that Arenacross would be more appealing. Some riders, man, they get it. I had all my kids. I had Luke Fowler and Clark Robbins. I had these kids just absolutely banging bars in Arenacross this winter, making cash, making $1,000, and they were stoked. They couldn't believe they made $1,000. And then, I know Pleasure Valley has their big money race, the Travis Pastrana race. That we need 20 of those. We need 30 of those. And I'm not saying these are just amateur A races. I think these kids need to be racing against the vets, like the Rod Bell type dudes, the Marshall Welton type, these types of guys that are out there. I mean, in your area, I'm assuming like John Shore, Isaiah Clark, like these kids need to be racing against them. That's who I raced growing up. I raced against local, like badass privateer type dudes that were out making money for bills. And I was out trying to make my first $500. And so I agree 100%. If Arenacross was a little bit more connected between them all, there was a little bit more unity there, it probably would help. But on the motocross side, we need more of those big $15,000, $20,000 pro purse races. And these kids need to be at those things 1,000%. But
Would you
go ahead?
I agree with you 100%. Would you say, this is my personal feeling, if you don't have a ride and be at Loretta's, you're not getting one. You might maybe earn one, but the reality is most of these teams, and that always goes back almost to super minis. That's changing a little bit with the KTM shakeup. But so if you don't have the ride, I think you should go just chase, like you said, go chase experience in these really seasoned veteran pro races. You go to that Cody Gregg 2-stroke race, there's good dudes on the line there for good money. And the same with, like you said, all these other, I think you should chase racing, go race these wily vets who are probably better than you think they are. That kind of
it's a rude awakening for them. They get smoked by some dudes and they can't believe it. And it's like, no, they have craft that you don't have yet. And it's absolutely, and I'll give you a quick story on that. Jesse Nelson was a phenomenal amateur who turned into a phenomenal pro. And the year he won Loretta's and won Mammoth in the A class, he was racing at the Los Banos Fairgrounds on Saturday nights against me. And I was whooping him every Saturday because I was a fairgrounds legend. I mean, I had that stuff mastered. I knew every trick in the book. And I remember I beat him like 2 weeks in a row, like every moto, and he was out winning everything in the A class, but he couldn't take me at the fairgrounds. And I remember the third one, he shows up and his dad came with him to this one because it was him and his mechanic every other time. And his dad showed up and I knew them from when he was a little kid. And his dad's like, don't take this the wrong way, Daniel, but I'm just here to find out what the hell is going on and why Jesse can't beat you out here. I don't get it. I don't get it. And I said, dude, he's a kid. He has so much speed and raw ability. He's going to blow past what I ever dreamed of being. But right now, today, I got more knowledge in my pinky toe than he does. I play him every moto. I could slow him up. I could make him crash just out of just playing with him. And he was faster than me every single night, but I knew the game. And these kids need to mess around with dudes like that could just whoop them. I mean, Stephen Roman is still out there shredding around. And dude, I'm telling you, young amateur kid, you think you're hot? Go race Stephen Roman somewhere. He will embarrass you. And it's because he knows things that you don't know. And you're right. So as far as what you're saying, I think what you're getting at is that we need a more organized, collective, minor league type thing that allows these kids to realize that this exists so they can go and make some cash and race against some older dudes that know some stuff. And then boom, they show up at their next Futures or Combine and they're like way better and way smarter. And that's in front of the factory team. So, yeah, I don't even know if Futures and Combines necessarily is the minor league. To me, it's turning into the third class of the major league. I think we do. I think we need just more Arenacross, more organized fairgrounds racing, more money thrown into fairgrounds racing, more money into the Pleasure Valley type stuff. And man, if they doubled and tripled that up, I mean, it very quickly could solve itself, to be honest with you. And I agree with you. If you're in the B class and you don't walk out of there with a ride that gives you somewhat of a pathway into Futures and Combines, I mean, I'd be looking at Canada. I'd be looking at Pro Arenacross. I'd be looking at I'd be making phone calls to Australia to go to Australian Supercross, race SX3. 100%. I mean, it's not there yet, but maybe Futures and Combines is opening up a door for this stuff to be created and people to take advantage of this opportunity and realize that there's a bunch of talented 16, 17, or 18-year-old kids that don't know really what to do, don't know where to go, and they could still make it. They just need somewhere else to land. So fingers crossed. Maybe we get there. I mean,
I like your, we get a little help with Cheyenne Harmon this past year, and he won the GT Arenacross Championship. Yep. And he's able to make a pretty darn good living. Obviously, he had to hustle that up and get his sponsorship package together and get funding and do all the things that all of these journeymen do. But
and the ones that do it good can make a life for themselves. And
he's making a good living. And so these kids need to understand that hustle a little bit. Does your Supercross U go into that? I would imagine that it does. Do you talk a little bit about the business of Supercross outside of the quote unquote team paycheck?
More on the consulting side. The general education that I have is more on just navigating different things, and especially on the emotional side. I cover a lot of the emotional stuff and just how to navigate what I call the trenches of amateur racing, because it's brutal for everybody emotionally more than anything, more than physically or even financially, I think the emotional burden is the biggest one these families take. So it's mostly on that stuff. But in my one-on-one consultations, I have a couple kids that are B and A, and I've literally told them, like, if your dream is this, you're not going to get there by just going this way. You're going to have to go this way, this way, this way. That you have to go every direction if you want to get there. And that means you should be doing things that you don't think are right. And that would be, again, Clark Robbins is an example. I talked to his dad before the season. I said, if you want to do good in futures, you better go in Arenacross. And they said, okay. And he went right in there, and he had some crashes. He had some tough nights, but he had some great nights, and he learned a whole bunch, and he got fourth this weekend. And don't be surprised if this year, next year, that kid is going to win one of these things, because he learned some craft that he would have never got just practicing.
So I like Clark. We did engines for him last year before you picked him up. So we were
Kid, love
very
it.
happy to, really, really nice guys. And it was I was stoked to see him be successful, because I know the kid's got the beans, as do quite a few of these athletes. We also actually, I think you know him pretty well. I think he works with you a little bit. The Riggins family.
Riggins, as in Logan?
Logan. Yeah.
Oh,
Can you get stuff for them a little bit?
They're new family, bro. So I did South Carolina now. And I mean, it's funny because while we started this call, I just got a new computer where my phone actually kind of connects. And I've had one phone call. Well, now two, both from him. I've had 2 phone calls from Logan Riggins since we started this actual show. And I know what it's about tomorrow's practice, because we're trying to help level him up for the next round of futures, and he needs some ruddy stuff. We need to mess the track up. So the plan, I think, is to trash his practice Supercross track and make it a little harder, because right now he's going too fast on it. It's too good, and we're gonna.
He called me earlier today, which is ironic about about him calling you today. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, you bring up something that Derek and I have had a lot of questions about, and that is there doesn't seem to be a definitive path on how to get a pro card. You mentioned Jay Coop getting it at 19. You've got, somebody like Cole Davies coming from outside of the United States. From your perspective, is it pretty definitive on how to get a pro card these days?
As far as, I mean, it's pretty black and white on how to get it. As far as, again, it goes back to each individual person. Like some people I think could get it going through futures, and that would be their pathway. And some, maybe it's not. Maybe it's going through pro-ams. Maybe it's going through Loretta's and getting top 20. I think everyone's a little bit different, and it's a little bit undefined too, because futures is still invite only. It hasn't opened up into where it's just, yep, that's my path. Some aren't getting invited yet because they're not really ready yet. So to me, it's not definitive in everyone's individual pathway, but it's pretty black and white now on your options.
So this is the question that I've been asked by quite a few parents, and that is if the combine, let's just stick to futures because we're talking about Supercross predominantly today, but we could actually integrate both of them. Futures, you've got 22 spots on the gate. Outdoors, we've got 42 spots on the gate. What's your thoughts on who gets quote unquote invited to both of these? How do we, I don't ever like to use the word fair because that's kind of an adulterated snowflake word nowadays, but there are certain families out there that don't have the direct line to an OEM. We've got, let's say, 5 OEMs, and maybe you can shed some light on it. Is there a certain allotment to each color of bike to fill that gate up?
So I'll start by saying that Harv Whipple runs this part of the program, and my experience with him has been A+. I think he does an amazing job for what he's been dealt. It's very tough. And the reason how I say that is because when they first launched Futures that first year, they had a hard time filling the gate. There wasn't a lot of people willing to do it. I mean, Chance Hymas and Ryder DiFrancesco and Gavin Towers, I mean, outside of, I think, Luke Kalatsian, there wasn't really any other kids out there that were doing it consistently and getting the tracks done. I mean, it was very, very light as far as the depth because not a lot of people knew about it or were ready for it. The next year got better, and now everyone's gotten wind, and now it's like there's 100 kids trying to get in, and it's turned into a little mini problem that they're having to solve in the moment. Harv does an amazing job with this because he's one of the most fair people that I've ever dealt with. I mean, I've had some conversation with him where I've tried to get a kid in and he said no, and he'll have legitimate fair reasons. And I've had kids that maybe shouldn't have got in because of the opportunity there. They got in because it's hard to fill that gate perfectly, especially when there are injuries. These kids are weeding up a lot. I think a lot of them are trying a little bit too hard. And I think Luke Fowler said it best on the podium this weekend. He's like, man, these kids are all crashing all over. When I was in fifth, I knew I'd pass a few more, and he did. He got second. Mm-hmm. A very smart kid. Luke is very smart. So no, I think right now their challenge is figuring out how to go about this the right way because it went from being bare to like too many very, very fast. So as far as the model goes with me, we had our team riders that were expected to be signed up if they wanted. I had some kids that didn't want to. Max Shane is a kid right now who is very good at Supercross. He could no problem be in there doing it, but they opted to not do it this year because he's taking a longer path. That's based on his guidance from Greg Albertson. That's his coach. And we had a conversation as a group, and we decided that we were going to put one more year into his amateur, let him grow up and develop a little bit more, and then we'd go into in 2026. I had a kid named Wyatt Thurman, who is one of the most phenomenal Supercross riders I've ever seen in my life, and will probably be a Supercross champion. I'll throw it out there right now. He's 14 years old, and he is a freak. And he went in this year right away. Now, he did have an injury in a corner. He didn't get hurt. He got hurt on a Supercross track in a corner. It was a very weird, unfortunate deal where he hurt his shoulder, so he's not out there. But that kid maybe gets the top 5 by now at 14 years old because he was just unbelievably ready. But he, again, was part of the program. He was allowed to go in early. So right now, based on what I know, is that, yes, the manufacturers have their team riders that we could submit in, and then they fill the rest based on a group, kind of ranking them the best that we can. And everyone's fair. Ryan Holiday has been very fair in all this. Like, he is so calculated when he's trying to figure this out. I don't know the Yamaha side as much or the Honda side. I've dealt with Holiday the most, but I would say it's probably not perfect, but they're trying really hard to get it right. And it's just, it went from, again, a bare gate to like, oh crap, what are we going to do? There's so many, they all went in, and you got A kids like, oh my gosh, they should be in, but they're not on a team. You got B kids that maybe shouldn't be in there yet, but they're on a team and they probably have a higher ceiling. So they probably are more the future. They're figuring it out right now. And Harv does a great job. He is trying very hard, and I applaud the effort because he listens, and he's been great to work with.
Do you know the early year of the Futures? You recall? So they had a local qualification race at like a motocross track in the area that was supposed to be a Supercrossy track. In ours, it was 3 Palms MX, but it wasn't very Supercrossy. Anyway, you had
Arizona Cycle Park, I thought maybe had one.
Like, you had to kind of do that, and then you were qualified in. It was like a regional almost. And then from there, it was like a lap time based if you were allowed to race the night show deal. That was like the very first year of what we would call Futures, when it wasn't the sign up, anybody can race on Sunday deal. It was a like real Futures program. We had a couple athletes doing it that year. And I actually like that model. It's like, okay, we're going to take on Friday, we might have 30 or 35 that are here. And then the 22 best lap times from Friday get the opportunity at the program. But that goes back to what we were saying earlier. I think we need some form of a regional Supercross type thing where kids can get experience on real Supercross racing, and maybe that qualifies you in for your Futures. Plus, maybe do a combo: 10 are qualified in and 10 are manufacturers selected or something like that. But at the same time, I don't think we're missing too many kids who are really talented that want to do it. I don't think they're not getting the opportunity. I think that from the manufacturer, go ahead.
The problem is it's not about we're missing anybody. It's just there's no flow pattern. Mm-hmm. You want a 65 rider knowing 85, 125. There's steps, right? Every small little peewee baseball player knows there's single, double, triple in major baseball, hockey, basketball, football. Daniel said it a little bit earlier. What if we took your concept, Derek, and you had somewhat of a regional, for lack of better terminology, right? So then you get that narrowed down to 40 riders. Just like we have, ABC practice in the 250, 450, you're looking at adding 12 extra minutes to allow those guys to go out. Fastest qualifying time sorts the main event with 22 riders. So you're adding 2 6-minute time practices in the show, because like Daniel said, make it all A class only. You give them 2 6-minute practices. The top 22 guys, you make the night show. And then what you've done is you've created a funnel that at least the local kids, or even regionally, at least, all right, that's what I'm training for. Because if I go off of what Daniel said, you want to get picked up, you want to be a J Coop at 19 and get a factory ride, go win Futures on Saturday night, but you can't get in. And then when you can't get in, this goes back to playing the long game. If you have somebody that's being managed by Daniel and does a great job, stays healthy, doesn't overtrain, doesn't overextend, doesn't run into Epstein-Barr and all the other stuff that comes with it, right? Now you get into a Futures race at 17, 18 years old. I know it's a little bit old, Daniel, but you know what I'm saying? A legitimate 16, 17 years old, where now we have 22 legit dudes that now you win the Futures. As you said earlier, Daniel, if Clayton had won and there's only 4 really fast guys in there and there's only 9 on the gate, Luke's not going to get credit for what he did, because everyone's going to say there wasn't a deep field. So to me, you create the funnel, you created a really good gate of 22 dudes. You have the ability to say, as Daniel said, you can pay them now. So now there's a chance for them to redeem some of the expenses of getting there. It gets in front of the people that are the decision makers. And now I think we've corrected where you've got a long game that can be managed. You have an environment that they can be essentially exposed in a good way. And like Daniel said, under the lights, 70,000 people, the whole 9 yards. And then now you have that opportunity where I just don't see that right now. I've got quite a few parents that are like, I've put in for it, don't get a return phone call. Put in for it, don't get a return phone call. So now what they're doing is they're starting to become disenchanted. And what are they doing? They're no longer training for Supercross because they're like, why would I spend the time to set up a bike, practice at a facility, and can't go race Supercross? And then this is where the parents come full circle. And Daniel, I'd really appreciate your insight on this. You have some kids that are being told, okay, you haven't accumulated enough points to get your pro card. And the reason why we don't want you on that Supercross track is it's too dangerous because you don't have your pro card. And then we had the Super Minis out on Saturday night.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either.
People are like, I don't get it. You're saying that my son who, very, very good, top 5 at Loretta's, can shred on a Supercross track. He can't go ride the track because it's too dangerous, but then you could put a 85 rider out there. You just talk out of both sides of your mouth. How do we solve it?
I think they're trying to figure that out now. Again, no,
Okay.
I think it's a lot more short term than long term as far as what we're working with here. That it landed on their lap a little bit. And I've had those conversations where they're like, whoa, what just happened? So what I believe happened is, and if you look back in time, they had the Supercross Futures. The name came from the Sunday amateur days. That's where this started. It was on those days. And they went away from that, I believe, during the COVID years, I believe is when that kind of stopped. And when they came out of that, they somehow came to the idea of creating Supercross Futures as a stepping stone class for just the all-star type kids. Again, it started out so like, I'm thinking after year 1, they probably didn't even know if it was going to continue because it just didn't really take. You had 3 kids that were on teams that were pretty good. And then nobody else was really like even capable at that point. And they were letting anyone out there.
And that was the year my kid got out there. Yeah, like that was like a local pro kid.
It was 21, I believe. And then what happened is everyone really quickly went, oh, whoa. And then there was an instant shift over in 22, 23, and 24 to what it is now. I can give you another example. And this is where I see more of a problem in this, because if you are a kid that's maybe hasn't gotten the results and hasn't done anything at any of the big races, and I know, again, the amateur races, I know we have a mixed feeling on the amateur races, but still that's where the competition is. So if you haven't done well enough there to earn your entry in, it's hard to say that kid's missing out on an opportunity when really maybe he's not capable of doing anything in futures anyway, other than being out there, which is a great experience, but maybe his pathway to the pros is going to take him longer and he'll get on that gate the longer route. The kids that I think are maybe getting a little bit hosed here, and I'll give you an example of one. There's a kid named Seth Shirley that I coach, that I work with. Now, he's had some injuries. He hasn't raced in a while because of some injuries, but he is way good at Supercross type stuff. He's got a natural ability, but he doesn't really race motocross stuff that much. He really hasn't. And so he doesn't have motocross results. Now, he's not going to get anything in the amateur world as far as like off the charts results. So he won't be able to get his way into futures. But right now, I'm telling you, he would beat 7 or 8 of those kids maybe, because he's actually really good at Supercross. So those are the kids that maybe in the short term are kind of getting a little bit of the hose right now because they're good enough to go into futures and probably be pretty good at it, but their outdoor results won't get them in. And that's where they're required to get the results to get in. So, but again, that's all being figured out now because it ballooned in their lap in 2 years. And it's gotten to be like, we can't get anyone to do this, to everyone wants in this thing right now. And it's like, wow. I will, though, add one thing, though, and this is the good part about this. I've noticed this year there's a change. Drew Adams won last year at 16 years old. Cole Davies won last year at 16 years old. Landon Gordon is 18. Enzo Timmerman is 18. Alexander Fedorstov is 19. Ryder Malinowski is 18. Landon Hartz is 19. It's getting older. Luke Fauser is now at 17, almost 18. It's getting older in futures. These kids are getting a little bit older by the time they blossom. And of course, you're going to have some crazy ones in their list. Landon Gibson is he's a phenom. Okay. So he's going to be your random young one. Caden Dudney, he's a phenom. Wyatt Thurman, a phenom. It's getting older. It is definitely getting older. Now with the pro rule changing to 18, it's going to actually force everyone to slow down a little bit. And you're going to see more kids learning it at 16, 17, but developing the skills to win it at 18 and 19. And so it's actually kind of correcting itself out on accident a little bit, But again, the one thing missing is the pathway in program, which I think they're trying to figure out right now because it did balloon in their face. So it's a work in progress with a lot of opportunity to be great. And I think they're trying very hard to get it right because it's been successful, but it's been hard to manage. So I would give them another year at least before we put all the judgment down, because I think they're doing things in the direction of the right way. It needs a little bit more, but it's definitely getting more correct and getting older and getting more established as everyone learns that this is the pathway in. It really is. I mean, this is the way in now, is to do good at these things. And the better that the older kids do in it, the better that'll be for everybody, because we'll slow this whole thing down a little bit.
Go ahead.
You're in a unique situation, Daniel, because Evan rode Supercross early. Brian Deegan talks about the fact that Haiden rode Supercross early. When you look at the idea that there's this age increase to 18, right? You're really in a win-win situation. You've got a 14-year-old who's at puberty. He's not burnt out on racing. Ideally, he's a little bit better at Supercross than he is motocross, which works to your advantage because a lot of kids are the opposite. Never been on a Supercross track. Evan comes to you at the end of next year. You smash it. You get to Loretta's top 5. Everything's looking good, but you know the future for Evan financially and opportunity-wise is Supercross. How do you approach it?
Luckily for Evan, his dad has studied the sport, and the Justin Cooper model, which was an accident, the Levi Kitchen model, which was an accident, I will be doing those on purpose. So Evan, regardless of how good he is, he will not be racing futures until he's 18, the first time. And then the goal would be to win it at 19, because I just believe that he'll be, and even though he's a weird little mature kid, he's very mature for his age. It doesn't matter to me, because I want him to be the finished product when he goes in there, because I don't want to be experimenting on futures, but that's just me. I'll tell you right now, he'll probably have at least a year or 2 of racing pro Arenacross before he even does his first futures Supercross. But that's because I uniquely have seen the sport from so many angles. And again, I believe that the Levi Kitchen Justin Cooper model, which was, again, accident. They didn't do that there was no strategy behind that. That was just how it happened for those two. That is a model that you can actually implement on purpose if you want to, and if you're willing to play the long game, which I am, but I'm only playing the long game because I just started. If I was in this since 50s, maybe I'm burnt out by now and I need to get him in there and get this thing over with. But we're starting right now at 14. So no, I'm playing the long game, and you will see him at his first futures race probably in 2028, even if he's ready in 26.
And Derek, you and I have waited so long for that kind of an explanation, because it's this constant struggle, right? You want to get the 10,000 hour rule in place, so you start them early. You try not to get them burnt out. The focus is Supercross, but there's no place to practice Supercross. There's no definitive funnel to drop into I hate to use the word guarantee, but at least get a legitimate shot at going Supercross. So then the parents sit back and go, do I go left or do I go right? I just don't even know where to go. Am I starting too early? Or like you said, Daniel, or a little bit earlier, are you going to sit back in 4 years and go, shoot, we should have started a little bit earlier? That's why I've quoted Brian Deegan numerous times when Jace asked him, do you think you did the right thing? And Brian says, we rode a little mountain bike. We rode a little pit bike. We did backflips into pits. We've raced Supercross. We've raced motocross. He goes, I don't know, but we'll see. And I just love that, because even Brian's saying nobody's got an exact formula. He hopes that he's done the right thing. And I think that's the most important takeaway for the parents is there is no, this is the absolute. But right now, the frustration that Derek and I hear is which direction do we go? If we know Supercross is where the money is at, and that's the future of the sport, but there's no path to get there. So the parents end up revolving. They end up going back to motocross because it's the only place they can go ride. Then they get stuck in this endless loop all over again. Derek, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I think you nailed it. I kind of what I'm taking from this conversation, Daniel, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is really what these athletes should be focusing on Supercross young, these families, because it is where they need to go. And it is where, if you go win futures, it'll do you much better, in my opinion, than winning Loretta's right now. And I feel like both will do you good, right? Like you can see that Carson Wood and the Dudney kid both got star rides because of their motocross prowess. But on the flip side, Dudney's great, but he's not polished at futures yet. You know, he's young and he's still developing as a Supercross rider. But on the flip side of that, you have your former guy going Cole coming in and crushing futures and then getting a ride without having any pedigree, quote unquote, in the US. But I just take it as, I agree with Coach. I think if the sport could grow and improve, it needs to have more facilities throughout the country that people can ride this type of riding. It doesn't have to be a true pro spec track, but it needs to be the timing and those types of things. And then I think kids need to start playing with it. And I kind of actually, like my shop's on 5 acres, and back when I rode, I considered building it just an arena crossy, supercrossy track just for fun, because that's a space that I have. But I really think that's the model that most people need to go to, is maybe you go to your local track, see if they're willing to invest with you on their facility with that type of track. It doesn't have to be full blown, full blast, the whole size, but get the couple of the rhythms, get a couple obstacles. And that's why that arena cross route is so smart. So, if you can go to arena cross, it doesn't take a lot of space. Do they still do 2 nights? Yeah, they still do 2 nights of racing, right? So that's awesome too. You get double the gate drops you would normally get in one weekend. The last thing I was going to say was, if Futures continues to pick up, and now you said you just draw, I didn't know they were going to 18 for pro, which I think is correct. I really, really think they should do that.
It's personally, just so you know, it's in 2 years. So it's this year it's 16, next year it's 17, then the following year is 18.
I think that's fantastic. So then the question becomes, we need a minor league. And the reason I say that is you have a guy like Drew Adams who crushed it last year. You could not do better than Drew Adams did. He won everything. What is his incentive? Like, it's hard to keep that kid motivated to go, yeah, you should just go do spring nationals and a couple futures, and you should go do Loretta's again, because he has nothing to win and everything to lose. Now, granted, he wants to be a dominant guy. He wants to win. But I think that if Futures paid, all right, well, I'm not quite in the big show, but I'm going to go to Futures and go win that championship. And there's a little bonus there at the end. And I'm sure Kawasaki might have something in line for him. But I also think, hey, you're part of the show. You should get paid. You're part of this show. And that's just, obviously, that's a whole different discussion about Feld and how that stuff works and MX Sports. But to me, if that could become a real thing, then all of a sudden you get to see people incentivized to stay into Futures maybe one more year. It's like, hey, we're getting better and better, and we can afford to at least cover our cost to go to these races. If we can cover that cost, we'll do it.
Yeah. Again, I don't know for sure. My direct line of communication has been broken as of recent days, so I don't really know exactly what's going on over there, but I do have a hunch that there is some kind of a collective championship being formed. If you look at what they've changed the name to, it's no longer Futures and Combines. I call it that because that's what I call it, but it's actually SMX Next Supercross, SMX Next Motocross, and then, of course, the all-star race at the SMX, whatever. It looks a lot to me like there's a formation of something there that's going to end up being something. And I can tell you right now, just the last contract that I helped negotiate before I left with KTM was Landon Gibson's, and his was the first contract that we had ever done that had language like that. Everything else, these kids didn't even, Casey Cochran didn't even have anything in his contract about Future. That wasn't even, it was just like a bonus thing that they added. Same with Juju. That was just a bonus thing that you had. But Landon Gibson's contract was built around the idea of the Futures and Combines and what he does in those. That was the first one like that. So I believe that that's what's going to happen. I don't see it going the other way where they go away from it. I think they're going to actually just put it together at some point. Now, what's it look like? I don't know. But I can tell you right now that there is, I think, heavy interest and heavy push for there to be something a little bit more solidified when it comes to that. And it should be done. It would be a good move if they did it, depending on how it looks. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see that in the next year or two, where there is some sort of a collective championship or something that's unified, because they're already doing it in the name, and they wouldn't do that otherwise. There's no reason why they would do that unless they weren't trying to build something. So don't be shocked if they do.
Can we shift gears, Coach?
Yep, absolutely.
So Daniel, how much weight do you put on the bike for your son? What do you tell him? How do you navigate that? And we talk about this on the show all the time. I have my personal opinions, but how good of a level bike do you think your son's at versus the absolute best? Let's call it a 5, a 6, a 7, a 8, a 9, a 10 out of 10. And when do you think they should get the really good bike, or do you think that should wait till pro? And I say really good because, once you make that step to pro, you get the really, really good bike if you're on the factory side. But
I believe, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe that at least with the Futures and Combines, I believe they still have the claim rule in place on those, which means those bikes have to somewhat be within willingness to let out the door. And I know that because again, our riders at KTM and Luke Fowler, Clark Robbins, Landon Gibson, I know their package and it's very good, but it's not something off the chart. It's not like, oh my God, it's just very, very good. It's like high quality, solid for them. And I can tell you right now, even for Luke Fowler, he didn't like his race bike at first. We had to detune the ignition a little bit just to mellow it out for him because he wanted to ride it harder. And it was a little too fast at first. So I believe that that's also an individual rider thing. There's some kids that could just handle it. My son's going to be a problem for me. I can tell you that right now because he handles powerful engines very well. In fact, he struggles with slower bikes. He's a little guy, but he can ride a 250 better, or he can ride a 125 right now. And so I think he'll be able to handle all the power in the world because it's just the way he rides. He purrs the bike in the middle everywhere. Some kids that like to ride on the wick and like to ride just absolutely on it, they're going to be, I think, actually struggling with more power because the good powerful 250s are going to be hard for them to ride. I think they're going to be all over the place on one, and they would actually do better slowing down their program and riding slower bikes on their way up. So I think individually, everyone's going to be a little bit different. But with my son right now, 125, we have a pipe and silencer and an ECU on his EFI TC 125, and he complains to me every second of every day. And then his 250 is stock with a pipe and an ECU, and he thinks it's the fastest bike on the planet. And that's probably the problem because we go back and forth a little bit. And it's one of the reasons why I was a bad dad recently, Coach Robb, is because my son wants to make it to Loretta's this year, went to his first qualifier. And let's just say I went a little long on our Supercross riding. Up until the week before, we were out riding Supercross and adding a couple triples to the rhythm section that he hadn't done yet, that he wanted to conquer, when we should have maybe been on some outdoor stuff. So we're battling a little bit of the engine stuff now because he's going from a 250 on Supercross to a 125 on outdoor, and he doesn't understand it all yet, but he just knows that one feels good and one feels bad. So it's a hard question for me in the moment because I'm living it, and it's complicated at the moment.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, you said you'd be kind enough. You had an hour, and we promised not to run long here. Can't thank you enough for the insights, the feedback. I know Derek and I have been extremely excited to have you on board. So, Derek, any last parting words?
No, a huge thanks to Daniel, and really appreciate everything you had to say. And all the well in your future endeavors with Supercross U, and then hopefully you get some of that experience brewing with your son.
Daniel, where can they find you at Supercross U? Where do we send them?
Supercrossu.com. That's the homepage, and pretty self-explanatory on the homepage. You can check it out there. And also we have Instagram, which is obviously new. We're just firing that off right now. And then on my own socials, I'm very active on those. I'm very, very transparent, and I'm not afraid to be revealing. I've been that way my whole life, and I share. And, last weekend, again, we raced at Muddy Creek, and I was very honest with the absolute fail that went down at our first Loretta Lynn's qualifier due to some bad dad decisions. So, you can follow me on that too if you want to experience what I'm going through, because I document our lives. I don't do it like the Deegans. I don't have an organized YouTube, but I'm very, very transparent on my social media. And if you want to follow my son's journey and laugh at me along the way, feel free to follow my story on Instagram, because I'm not afraid to put out all the dumb things that I'm doing right now. I'm very good at managing other people's kids, but learning how to manage my own right now has been it's fun for others and a little tough in this house.
We should set up a call with Tony. I think that'd be hilarious.
Oh, by the way, a lot of my influence in life with my own son's decisions came from Tony Alessi. Just so you know, I'm very close with Tony. Again, you're dead on. I think he has a mic problem, but he is really, really good with everybody else. And I think
amazing.
I think he's a genius.
I would put anybody in the hands of Tony Alessi.
I would literally let Tony manage my son's career from here to the end. I think he's a genius. He just has a dad-son problem. That's all.
Which I think every dad listening to this can relate to it. So,
yeah,
Daniel, thanks again on behalf of all of us here at Coach Robb Podcast Network. Thank you guys. The numbers continue to grow. Thanks, Dunlop, for putting this together, and we'll see you next month.